This is starting at 1908 hours. The timing is actually 1910 hours GMT. This is part 2 of the Khoodeelaar television channel on the internet, being broadcast only on the internet, not on terrestrial, not on satellite, not on cable platforms, on Tuesday, the 4th of October 2022. The Daily Star, which is not by any means a thoughtful title in Fleet Street, but it has been doing something quite entertaining by putting on this kind of clown picture of the crazy Kwarteng. There is a red thing on the nose in every picture, major picture that's been running about Kwarteng. And although the Times today, that is the Tuesday, the 4th of October, hasn't got the clown in the title, the way that Kwarteng is adjusting his glasses, I mean, in photographic terms, make him look like a clown, or even worse. As I said, as a photographer, the angle that I said yesterday was being created by or chosen by many of the photographers, were showing in photographic terms the degeneration and disintegration of LieZ Truss. For example, this picture, which I practically predicted that increasingly her face would degenerate. Now, this picture on the front page of the Daily Boris graph, you cannot see on the camera because of the angle and the reflections. Now, this is a picture on the front page of the Daily Boris Johnson graph of Tuesday, the 4th of October 2022. In the serial number, Daily Boris graph is 52,063, and its price is £2.50. And the Boris Johnson graph has got kind of columnists that are ultra idiotic, ultra irrational, ultra stupid, like LieZ Truss herself. There is this thing called Cheryl Jacobs. These are kind of Satan's disciples. They go intentionally out of their way to come across as being irrational and so on. And there is a piece on page 2 of the Times of Tuesday, which you didn't have the access to in the first edition when we did the first edition because of logistical arrangements. This heading is very telling. The headline is Police refuse to intervene as protests disrupt conference, which is protests about the Conservatives' jamboree being staged in Birmingham. And the first paragraph reads, Ministers rebuked Birmingham police for refusing to stop protesters abusing delegates and disrupting events at the Conservative Party conference. But the West Midlands police commander of the ground on the ground in the city told party bosses that it would be too political for them to intervene. They compared the prospect of police officers stopping protesters protests taking place to authoritarian regimes, saying this isn't Belarus. Now, this is the stage where it has degenerated. As I said yesterday, things can only degenerate. And LieZ Truss, as I've said, I have noticed her, at least since the moron Cameron launched her and parachuted her to become the candidate in a kind of East of England seat, which is one of the Conservatives' traditional so-called areas. And when Cameron the moron parachuted her, and that is the first time I came across her existence, it was quite clear that she was no good. Now, that is not just applicable to her. What has been happening with the so-called selections of candidates for parliament in the UK for various parties is that, contrary to the lying propaganda about democracy, these are not, selections are not held democratically, ethically, least of all honestly. So LieZ Truss was probably sleeping with Mark Field, married MP at the time, when Moron the Cameron, or Cameron the Moron, foisted her as a prospective parliamentary candidate, PPC, in one of Cameron's kind of seats. There is no evidence that Cameron ever understood the need for ethics, morality, whatever, or that he bothered about any of these. And the fact that Cameron actually defeated David Davis at the beginning of the century, turn of the century election to replace, was it Dracula Duncan Smith? The fact that Cameron took the post away from David Davis showed that the Conservatives are already dead politically, and they were killing the country with them. Because that was the post that Cameron had to cling on to until Gordon Brown was ousted in 5 years, 6 years later, in May 2010. And in the commentary today about quasi quatrang on LieZ Truss, etc., there is no hint, there is no sign of any of the commentators talking about any of the disasters that preceded the current disaster. Because had LieZ Truss not been overly promoted by the corrupt David Cameron, the slogans, the narratives that have dominated the so-called Conservative Party leadership candidate election would have been different. And they would have related, at least nominally, to the realities of life of the people. But they didn't relate because there is no connection between the Conservative Party's selected candidates or selected, a list of the selected candidates, if you like, list of the candidates competing for the selection. Cameron is very sick, poisonous, jealous, and petty-minded criminal. How? Because when David, when he became the Conservative Prime Minister, and there was this need on their part to talk about the migrants crossing the channel into England, and Calais being a place which was the kind of location of origin before the refugees attempted to cross the channel. So Calais became a kind of center for the migrants gathering in Europe, Western Europe. So when Corbyn visited Calais, kind of as a rebuff to the Conservatives' hatred of the migrants, this was something that was condemned by David Cameron in two ways. One was that Cameron condemned the fact that Corbyn went to solidarize with the migrants. And secondly, that Corbyn, according to Cameron, didn't even have any decent clothes on. Now, this was the pits. This was Cameron behaving in the most depraved possible way. And Cameron is more shameless than Boris Johnson. Can you imagine? Because Cameron cited his mom as having the opinion that she would give about how Corbyn should look. Now, it is a disgusting confirmation of the political death of the Labour Party that when Cameron was having a go at Corbyn in that kind of way, the Labour Party did not react. And that only reinforced the mythology that Cameron somehow had a moral high ground, and Cameron didn't have the moral high ground, and that Corbyn didn't have the moral high ground. Corbyn didn't have the moral high ground, and Cameron did. That is the line that they were promoting. And at that time, there were many Labour Party members of Parliament who claimed otherwise, that they were socialists, that they were actually socialists, and they supported most of what Corbyn supported politically. And when the Corbyn stint as leader of the Labour Party ended, it ended with Boris Johnson being shown as having won the landslide election of December 2019. Boris Johnson should not have won that election, never. And Boris Johnson should not have been allowed to have that election. But Corbyn, because he's a political idiot, surrounded by other political idiots, didn't see the constitutional law technique and tactic that was brazenly open in front of them. They could have really destroyed Cameron's capability by forcing him to abandon the election, and the flexibility of the Prime Minister calling the elections. There is a technical kind of factor that the fixed term parliament actually affected. And That as well showed that Corbyn was politically completely dead. So when LieZ Truss became the issuer of a variety of kind of tough sounding reactionary pledges, what she would do if she became the Conservative Party leader, and consequently, if she became leader of the Conservative Party and the government. Whenever she said things about tax, cutting tax, there were objections, including from the token rival at the time, Rishi Sunak. Now, Sunak objected, in a minor way. Others objected in a minor way as well. But the real objectors were the people who were being condemned to lose most of their income, etc., because of the corrupt political bribery that Margaret Thatcher turned LieZ Truss was claiming. LieZ Truss said that she was the Thatcher. And it shows the measure of the idiocy and brainlessness of the people in this country's Conservative Party, that they actually believe that. Most of the votes that she got, most of the votes of the Conservatives that she got, because it was only the Conservatives that actually could vote for the election of the leader. Most of the votes that LieZ Truss got at the beginning of September 2022, most of those votes were procured in an illicit, corrupt, immoral way by telling lies to the majority of the Conservative voters about the various bad habits and bad kind of things that the Labour Party did. Well, Corbyn's main kind of sin when Corbyn was still leader of the opposition, Corbyn's main sin, the biggest sin that could be attached to his name before all hell appeared to be let loose, was any suggestion, the slightest suggestion, that Corbyn was an anti-Semite and that he was a friend of the extreme Muslims, etc., etc. Now, as I have said before, I have known Corbyn for, what is it now, since 1977. No, 77 is the Ken Livingston. Corbyn I have known since 1982. 1982, he was among about 100 people present at the Altavali Park. It was a low-key demonstration organized against a villain at the time, villain that the villains included the persons and when Corbyn actually became leader of the Labour Party, it was very clear that Corbyn could not get together one single speech, either for delivery in the House of Commons or delivery elsewhere, that objectively speaking could actually convey a complete message about what he was leading the Labour Party to become and to do. It's patches and patches and patches. Itsy bitsy titsy. I mean, Corbyn never gave a complete picture about politics. And those idiots who still say that Corbyn was the best Labour Party leader, etc., of course, he was best among the worst. Of course, he was, because in terms of the innocence from too much knowledge about the various factual aspects of the struggle by the Labour Party in this country, Corbyn was more familiar with the failures and defeats and lies of the Labour movement than any of the others that became leader and had become leader. So Corbyn was a default reason for LieZ Truss to be in the position of leader of the country now, because if Corbyn had done his job, the Conservatives would have been abolished by now. That is what they actually deserve. That is what the country deserves. The Conservatives don't belong to society, to this country, and to the demography, to the active numbers of people that are eligible to vote and are, to that extent, so Corbyn kept giving the same, more or less the same speech about Palestine whenever he appeared at the Bethnal Green based York Hall as a guest of a shebang, a guest of an outfit that included, of course, inevitably, the socialist workers and some other factional outfits. They did not go there. Those who, like Corbyn, despite being members of the Labour Party, they never contrasted. They never contrasted or contrasted the disaster of the British policy on Palestine. So Corbyn was speaking without any real substantial difference between, or substantive difference between any two of his speeches about Palestine. And while Corbyn was speaking, he was also allowing literally dozens of foxes to go past where I'm sitting and go past all the way, go past the area that affected the politics in the most kind of raw manner. Corbyn showed that he didn't understand Palestine and he remained a foreigner in terms of perception, not in terms of culture, but in terms of perception, he remained a foreigner. And in terms of solidarity, he remained a complete, absolutely patronizing racist. So whatever is the girl. So Corbyn was no good about Palestine, even before he became leader of the Labour Party in Parliament. And Corbyn was no good when he was leader of the Labour Party in Parliament. And no matter how loudly Corbyn tried to kind of state his alleged affiliation with the Palestinians, wherever he spoke, it didn't make sense, because when Corbyn spoke, in the House of Commons, he spoke without authority. He could see and he could hear and he could feel that he was an empty shell. Why? Because the most important crime that the imperialist British racist anti-Muslim crusaders had committed against the Muslims in the subcontinent, and in particular in the Arabian land, in Palestine, was to dismantle the Muslim rule, the Muslim domination in terms of control of the administration, etc., etc., and to divide all of that to be looted by anti-Muslim forces and non-Muslims. So that's the headline kind of form of the actual situation. The detail is that Corbyn never spelt out his understanding of what the roles of the local councils were. So, for example, on housing, Corbyn came across as totally clueless about how Labour controlled councils were doing Conservative Party things. And it goes on, the list goes on. So Corbyn was no good politically. Personally, those who say that he is the most sincere person, etc., etc., those people who say that about Corbyn are, of course, in extreme situation, entitled to say that about Corbyn. But Corbyn does not deserve that kind of sainthood. So when Keir Starmer became leader, Corbyn hadn't left behind a legacy of solidarity with the likes of BabyAngelGeronimo or with Helen MacDonald. Because friends of BabyAngelGeronimo from across the globe are among the most genuine people on the face of the earth. And those people matter more than any number of political friends that Corbyn has. But Corbyn didn't come across as being even aware of the battle that BabyAngelGeronimo has been having to fight. And that the way that BabyAngelGeronimo has been treated by the criminals, the depraved DEFRA and the depraved Boris Johnson et al., the way that Boris Johnson and his co-depraved criminals have defamed BabyAngelGeronimo, violated BabyAngelGeronimo, in a nutshell, also contains all the bad things, the evil things that they have been doing and are doing and will do against all the innocent people elsewhere. That is to say, innocent people featured in events and conflicts and fights other than in the fight and conflict that BabyAngelGeronimo is the head of, at the front of. It is absolutely astonishing There's so many on the so-called left in Britain, these so-called literate people, socialists, have been praising, singing the praise of Jeremy Corbyn. And yet, none of these singers in praise of Jeremy Corbyn, none of these singers has spelt out their own limitations and their own kind of length of their own stupidity. What Corbyn did with the dirty die, that is Diane Abbott, made things absolutely ridiculously unbearable and politically embarrassing. Because Corbyn had already been married to Christine Chapman. And Christine Chapman, by all accounts, was a typical English woman. And Diane Dirty Di, when she took over Corbyn, marched into Chapman's sphere and Chapman's territory and demanded that Chapman left Corbyn and left London forthwith, immediately. That is something that Christine Chapman has recalled with great delight and glee to the readers of the Daily Mail and the scum newspapers, etc. When these facts are revealed again, because they had not been revealed in any comprehensive way in one piece or one series until Corbyn became the leader of the Labour Party. And Christine Chapman appears to have been waiting all this time for the right moment to expose this moron and traitor. And by all accounts, Christine Chapman appears to be an ordinary English woman. So she gave the details, including the chapter and verse about when Corbyn exhibited his friendship with Dirty Di as part of a trophy relationship, suggesting in the context that Corbyn was using Dirty Di as an item of exhibition, as a black-skinned girlfriend of a white politician. So much so that Corbyn took at least two of his white friends to his then house, which was kind of allowing Dirty Di to visit. And when they went into the room concerned, these friends and Corbyn were together. When they found what has been described in the Daily Mail group newspapers, practically unclothed Dirty Di in the bed on her own, which suggests that as far as Dirty Di was concerned, she was expecting the moron Corbyn to arrive so that she could wear him and proceed to the logical next steps. There are, of course, other lines of interpretation of that incident. Interpretation that Tom Bauer and others would no doubt complete. The fact remains that Corbyn came across as incompetent and stupid. And he has not denied the account published about Dirty Di being found unclothed in his bed while Corbyn and his mates returned to collect some paperwork or something while they were doing some distribution on the particular day. This has not been denied by Dirty Di either. And the Dirty Di acquired the appearance of being a black parent. She is, of course, black skinned, but she could have had a mixed race kind of white child. But she chose to have this African man, that is African origin black man, Thomas, with whom she went ahead and had a black child. She had, of course, performed the marriage with him. And since that moment of conception, whatever, of the child, Dirty Di, as she must have planned and plotted for years, decided to chuck this Thomas out of her life. And so she became serial friends with white lovers, including one with whom she spent the most exciting half hour of her life, wallowing and messing about in the straws of a location in the Cotswolds, according to a magazine called She. Because that particular recollection by Dirty Di was part of a series of, or a number of, recollections by, quote, celebrity women who were asked this simple question to recall their most exciting half hour or most exciting short period of time in their life. And the fact that Dirty Di talked about the straws and getting lost in the straws and spending the half an hour in the straws. The fact that that showed that she made that the most important event to recall about her life showed that she was never even remotely aware of being politically, socially, ethnically, whatever, black. Dirty Di was a completely brainwashed, artificial, etc., etc. Now, in the 1981 conference that I addressed as the keynote speaker about racism in the British media, that was 1981. Dirty Di was present, but she was nothing. She was not a speaker, or she was not a noted character. So any viewer viewing this should understand the political and campaigning and intellectual positions where I stand and stood and where Dirty Di stood. In 1981, when I addressed the UK-wide assembly of black media people, Dirty Di wasn't there. That is to say, she was physically there, but she wasn't noted as a person either to address the gatherings or to feature in the gathering in any original way. And the only reason why she was there at that time would have been because of the connection she had already established with white lovers. And by sitting in the kind of throne, Corbyn issued serial idiocies. And it went on. Now, Corbyn is a faker, as is Ken Livingstone Livingstone, and the rest of them. So, why am I saying all of this? Because it is Starmer. Starmer, that is the one that is going to benefit the most from the disaster this Kwarteng and the LieZ Truss have become. And almost inevitably, Starmer would be rewarded by the establishment in Britain for being in the post of the Labour Party leader while he is not Jeremy Corbyn. Corbyn has been made a dirty name, a toxic name, and they want Starmer to become the leader of the Labour Party and to become the leader of the United Kingdom government. When in 1980 we set up we meaning myself and a few of the mainly African origin, Caribbean origin people in the media called the Black Media Workers Association. And one of the people involved in all of that was, of course, Mike Phillips, the elder brother of Trevor Terrible Phillips. Mike Phillips was a very conventionally kind of oriented individual. And he had a weird sense of humor. Because he knew his brother, well, he had several brothers, but This one, the main official slave, mental slave for the British races, he knew that Trevor Terrible Phillips was a complete shallow and moron. Anytime that anyone mentioned Trevor Terrible Phillips to Phillips, Mike Phillips would put on an expression of the most benevolent smile because, as his biological brother, he could not really, in public, on the record, disown Trevor Terrible Phillips, no matter how bad the Terrible Phillips was. So that when Mike Phillips did that, put on that completely benign and false appearance of being amused, he really looked quite humorous. And any serious observer would have noticed how outraged Mike Phillips felt about by the antics of his biological brother Trevor Terrible Phillips. That is my reading. But then I was astounded years later to read that Mike Phillips had agreed to lend his name to a corrupt project. The corrupt project was kind of conjured up at the expense of the people. So these people that came from the Caribbean and Jamaica in the 1950s landed at Tilbury and have been being denied their rights, etc., 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 over decades, became a commodity in terms of the projects of the likes of confected by the likes of Trevor Terrible Phillips. And Phillips, I think, pushed Mike Phillips to give his name to the book, and they co-wrote that book, or they became known as the co-writers of that book. The Windrush generation, the Windrush Empire, Windrush. But you see, everything about the Windrush people and the racist treatment against them, the racist abuse of the Windrush people has been forgotten, put out of context. And Trevor Terrible Phillips has added the Windrush people as part of his CB. Because, like Abe Muzarewa in Southern Africa, Trevor Terrible Phillips is very black-skinned, but on the inside he is very servile and absolutely racist pale. So Dirty Di and Trevor Terrible Phillips did not feature at the 1981 UK-wide conference of black media workers, which was really connected with our founding in 1980 of the Black Media Workers Association, of which I was an active founder. So in the first edition, we talked about Alex Pascal, and we talked about Alex Pascal in the previous edition to that as well. Now, Alex Pascal, whose Wikipedia entry shows him as being aged 85 and as having been born in 1936 or something. Alex Pascal may be 85 or whatever. But Alex Pascal has understood the long story about racism, long story about fighting imperialism. Because Alex Pascal has always behaved as a grinning, too easily grateful ethnic person from the Caribbean. And he has not looked around, and he has not wanted the corroboration of fighting racism in Britain from other West Indian Caribbean people. Forget about the Asian people, which would be too much to expect of Alex Pascal, not because he's of a particular background, but because his outlook is too narrow. He's too ill-educated or not educated in the politics of fighting racism whatsoever. So when I bumped into him at the counter of the county court based in Islington, I think, Clerkenwell, and Shoreditch County Court, as the merged one's name is, I reminded Pascal of my voice and my speech, which he recorded on his tape recorder at that 1981 conference. And I demanded that he give me the copy of that, which demand I had been making since 1981, which demand he had never denied, but he had always lied about keeping the honor and promised to give me the copy. Now it's illegal. Pascal doesn't own that or any of the other of my speeches. Now, during that weekend, I chaired several so-called workshops about how to fight racism and what was going on in the mainstream media field. It was because of the Black Media Workers Association and the demands we made, the analysis of the British media bureaucracy we made, that the likes of George Alagitt, the BBC News presenter, is a beneficiary. He was nothing to do with the campaign in 1980, the campaign that I founded with others. But it's Alagitt and others became beneficiaries as black-skinned wannabes in media. Most of the beneficiaries who got the jobs in the BBC, mainly in the BBC, did so because of the Black Media Workers Association's founding work. And the main arguments of the Black Media Workers Association arguments are my arguments, my analysis. Because as I said, Mike Phillips is on the record as having shown the capacity to put on a face of being mildly amused by the antics of his brother, Trevor Terrible Phillips. But that's it. Otherwise, Mike Phillips is no different from the others in terms of seeking job and benefit. I'm the only one who has been doing the campaigning by actively discouraging any entrapment in any job or any career. Sheer principle. So when Diane Darty Abbott, Di, got the job as a press officer at the GLC after the 1981 election, the 1981 election of the GLC, which election was, let's say, hijacked by Ken Livingstone Livingstone. Now, whether she was already in a relationship with Jeremy Corbyn at that time or not, I don't know. But she did get that post in the GLC as a press officer. Now, as Ken Livingstone Livingstone confessed in that interview, byline to Sarah Bosley in March 1992, Ken Livingstone Livingstone had instructed GLC employees to stop me entering into the county hall. It follows that he must have instructed the GLC press office or ordered them to refuse to give me the GLC press releases and whatever. Whenever I ask questions about the GLC press office role, Darty Di would sometimes appear at the desk, at the counter, and Darty Di would be speechless. She would not have any comprehensive, coherent sentence to tell me what was it that she was doing. So Darty Di was then decorated later in the 1980s by the racists in the Labour Party as the black-skinned female that was going around wearing that T-shirt with the words black section. And the Labour Party's conference had a duly decorated Darty Di deliver a speech wearing the black section. So she put on the black section T-shirt, and that's it. When I wrote a number of critical rejections of the black section, I described the black sections as the Bantustan approach that the apartheid regime in South Africa had taken. And the likes of Mark Wadshitt, who very much subscribed to the black section stunt and servitude, opposed me and said I was wrong. I could not be wrong on that, because by the very creation of the Bantustan black section, the Labour Party was accepting that the Labour Party was a racist party which had two layers of membership. One was for the white people, and the other was for the black people. And so, therefore, they proceeded to display these four criminals as the black section candidates. I say the four because that includes Barney Grant as well. Now, Barney Grant was a criminal because he had beaten up a member of the Asian side of things, of the demography. And the rest of them did not defend the victim of Barney Grant's criminal attack on the Asian one. I never met the Asian one personally. I may have seen him, but never actually had the personal meeting with him. But the story is that Barney Grant was too insecure and too much caught up in the corruption, various aspects, which this particular individual member was opposing and was opposed to. So this individual was beaten up by Barney Grant and he was prosecuted. And when he went to the court, he said that there had been a political frame up against him. That was an absolute lie. Barney Grant was not framed. Barney Grant could have easily killed that man for no reason. So we shall be talking more about this and other aspects of Dirty Die in due course in later editions, either during the night or tomorrow. This is just over an hour. This program has been just over an hour long.